Every nerve in my body hummed a single name: Damon. Tonight, under the witness of the moon and our entire pack, he would finally claim me as his fated mate. But when his eyes, the eyes I had dreamed of since my first shift, met mine across the clearing, the love I expected to see wasn't there. Chapter 1: The Scent of a Promise. The scent of a promise was crushed wolfsbane and moonlight. It clung to the air in the healing den, a sharp, clean fragrance that cut through the heavier smell of dried blood and poultices. My fingers worked deftly, grinding the purple flowers with a smooth stone pestle. Each rotation of my wrist was a prayer, each crushed petal, a hope. Tonight was the first moon of autumn. Tonight was everything. A low groan pulled my attention to the cot beside me. Old Man Hemlock, a warrior whose shoulder had met the wrong end of a rogue's claw, shifted in his sleep. His breathing was even now, the fever broken. I had spent all day tending to him, because that's what I do. I mend, I fix what is broken. It's a quiet strength, one often overlooked in a world that praises the loud roar of a warrior over the steady hands of a healer. But Damon saw it. He always saw it. My heart gave a familiar flutter at the thought of him, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Damon, my fated, the beta of our Crescent Ridge pack. His scent, wild pine and crackling ozone, was a song my soul had known since the day I was born. Fate was a funny thing, wasn't it? A thread woven through your life that you couldn't see, but you could feel it pulling you toward your destiny. My destiny had a name and a smile that could make the stars themselves feel shy. Thinking about him again, are you? Lyra, another healer, asked from across the small den. She organized jars of dried herbs with a knowing smirk. You've been 1,000 miles away all afternoon. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. Is it that obvious? Arya, my dear. She chuckled, her voice warm and raspy like dry leaves. A she-wolf waiting for her claiming is about as subtle as a thunderstorm. We are all happy for you. It's a good match. A strong beta needs a steady heart beside him. Her words were meant to be a comfort, but a tiny familiar worm of doubt wiggled in my gut. A steady heart. Was that enough? Damon was ambitious. He was going to lead this pack one day, because he had the strength and the will to do it. I sometimes wondered if my quiet nature was a compliment to his fire, or a weakness he would have to overcome. Did he ever wish his fated was a fierce shield maiden instead of a mender of wounds? Pushing the thought away, I finished grinding the herbs into a fine, fragrant dust. This was just pre-ceremony nerves, I reasoned. Every she-wolf felt them. It's one thing to know who you belong to your whole life. It's another to stand before the entire pack and have that bond sealed in blood and moonlight forever. The bond would make us stronger. It would silence my doubts. It had to. As I cleaned my workstation, 2 pack elders passed the open doorway, their voices hushed but urgent. I only caught a few words, snippets on the evening air. Northern King's arrival is unexpected. Changes the dynamic. Draven is not a wolf to be trifled with. A shiver, completely unrelated to the cooling night, traced a path down my spine. The Alpha King was here? No one had said anything. A visit from the ruler of all packs was a momentous occasion, one that rippled with political tension. It didn't matter. Tonight was personal. It was ours. No king, no politics could touch the sanctity of a fated claiming. I packed the finished wolfsbane paste into a small clay jar, my hands steady once more. I had mended all the wounds I could for today. Now it was time to prepare for my own life to finally, truly begin. Chapter 2: The King in the Shadows. Following that moment of quiet reflection, the pack grounds erupted. The sound came first, a low guttural blast of a horn from the valley, a sound so deep it vibrated in my bones. It was a formal announcement, an arrival. The northern delegation was here. All thoughts of my ceremony scattered like startled birds because a visit from the Alpha King was not a casual affair. It was a display of power, and our pack, nestled in these mountains, suddenly felt very small. I hurried out of the den, joining the rest of my pack as they gathered in the main clearing, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. They came on foot, a silent, imposing procession emerging from the deepening twilight. The northern wolves were different, larger than our mountain stock, their fur shades of gray and black and snow white, their eyes holding a chilling stillness. They moved with the lethal grace of predators who knew no equals, and at their head walked him, Alpha King Kale Draven. He was a creature of myth and nightmare, taller than any wolf I had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. His hair was black as a starless night, and scars mapped his face, one pale line cutting brutally through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from my lungs. They weren't the warm gold or brown of our pack. They were the color of a winter storm, a piercing glacial gray that seemed to see everything and feel nothing. I felt a primal urge to lower my head, to make myself small. This was not just an alpha. This was a king. A king who, legend said, had ripped the throat out of his own traitorous fated mate. An open loop of fear and curiosity unwound in my mind. As our alpha, Marcus, stepped forward to offer the formal greeting, I searched the crowd for a familiar face. I found Damon standing near the front beside his father and the alpha's daughter, Clarissa. A jolt, sharp and unpleasant, went through me. He hadn't come to find me. He was already playing the part of the important beta, positioning himself near the powerful guests. He looked magnificent, his posture proud, but his focus was entirely on the Northern King. He didn't even glance my way. Is this what our life would be like? Him in the spotlight and me waiting in the wings? The question was a bitter taste in my mouth. I wanted to believe he was just doing his duty, but it hurt. It was a small hurt, but it was there, a tiny crack in the perfect picture I had painted in my mind. Later, I told myself, later, when we are alone, it will be different. It's the pressure of the king's visit, because everyone knows his reputation for being ruthless. The formal greetings were short, the words clipped and heavy with unspoken meaning. King Kale's voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together deep beneath the earth. He accepted the offering of peace, but his eyes swept over our pack with an unnerving intensity, as if he were assessing every warrior, every tree, every shadow for weakness. Then, for a single, heart-stopping second, his gaze landed on me. It wasn't a glance, it was an impact. The world seemed to fall away, the noise of the pack fading to a dull roar. Those storm-gray eyes locked onto mine, and I felt seen. Not as a healer or as Damon's fated, but as something else. Something he was analyzing, cataloging. There was no warmth, no interest, only a flicker of something dark and ancient, a shadow of a memory that wasn't mine. It was over as quickly as it began, his attention moving on, leaving me with a racing heart and a profound sense of unease. Why had he looked at me like that? What did he see? The feeling was so strange, so out of place, that it overshadowed the sting of Damon's neglect. A king had looked at me, and I felt like a secret he already knew. The ceremony was set to begin as soon as the moon reached its zenith. I tried to push the king from my mind, tried to refocus on the promise of the night. But a new thread of tension had been woven into the tapestry of my fate, a thread of cold gray that I couldn't ignore. Chapter 3. A Silence. Like glass. Moving on from that unsettling encounter, I took my place in the center of the ceremonial clearing. The world narrowed to a circle of silver moonlight. The familiar faces of my pack became a blur of shadows and shifting forms beyond the ancient stones that marked the space. This was it. The scent of pine was sharp on the air, a clean smell that was supposed to be calming, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. All the doubts, all the fears of the day, they were meant to melt away here. This circle was sacred ground, a place where destinies were forged and promises were made eternal. I lifted my gaze to the sky. The moon was a perfect, luminous pearl, pouring its light down on me like a blessing. I had dreamed of this night for years. I had imagined the feel of Damon's hand in mine, the warmth of the bonding mark on my neck, the triumphant howl we would share with the pack, a sound that declared our union to the world, a life of purpose, a life of love. It was all just moments away. To stand here was to be chosen, to be cherished, to be complete. The pack fell silent. It was a profound quiet, a held breath that felt as fragile as glass. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant call of a night owl. Then, footsteps. I didn't have to look. I knew the sound of his walk, the confident stride of the pack's beta. My beta, my fated. A real, genuine smile finally broke through my nerves, blooming across my face. I turned to greet him, my soul reaching for his. He stopped before me, framed by the moonlight. So handsome it made my chest ache. But something was wrong. It wasn't one thing I could name. It was everything. It was the rigid set of his shoulders, a stark contrast to the loving embrace I had expected. It was the way his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He was performing his duty. He was standing where he was supposed to stand. He was looking where he was supposed to look. Yet the space between us, which should have been buzzing with the energy of our bond, felt cold, vacant. My smile faltered. My gaze flickered past him, searching for answers in the crowd. I saw the Alpha's daughter, Clarissa, her expression a smug, triumphant mask. I saw the pack elders, their faces grim and unreadable. And then I saw the king. Cale Draven stood in the shadows at the edge of the clearing, his arms crossed over his massive chest, those storm-gray eyes fixed on us with an unnerving, predatory focus. He wasn't just watching a ceremony. He was watching an execution. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my joy. What was happening? This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. I looked back at Damon, my eyes pleading with him. Tell me it's okay. Tell me I'm imagining things. He met my gaze, finally, and the bottom fell out of my world, because the love I expected to see, the warmth I had built my entire life around, wasn't there. There was only ice. A chilling, calculating, and utterly unfamiliar cold. His beautiful mouth opened, and I knew, with a certainty that shattered my soul, that he wasn't about to claim me. He was about to break me. Chapter 4. The Sound of a Lie. The world held its breath. Damon stood before me, a perfect statue carved from moonlight and lies. His heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. I could feel it, a faint echo from a bond that was still for a few more seconds ours. How could he be so calm? My own heart was a frantic drum, a wild thing beating against the cage of my ribs, screaming that something was wrong. Wrong, wrong. He cleared his throat. The sound was a crack in the fragile silence of the clearing. Arya Thorne, he said, and his voice was not his own. It was a formal, polished thing, a stone he had shaped for this very moment. Our destiny was written by the moon, a sacred path we were meant to walk together. He paused. He let the pack lean in, let them savor the sweet poetry of his words. He was a performer, and this was his grand stage. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a claiming. This was a speech. But a pack's destiny is greater than that of two wolves, he continued, his voice rising with false sincerity. Our future demands strength. It demands power. It demands a union that will fortify us against our enemies and lead us into a new era of prosperity. He looked from the Alpha to the Silent, watching King in the shadows. He was speaking to them, not to me. I was just a prop in his play. A gentle heart is a worthy thing, Arya, but it cannot shield our people from the harsh realities of this world. Then, he turned his full attention back to me. His eyes were empty. Absolutely, terrifyingly empty. Therefore, with the good of the pack as my witness and my guide, I reject this fated bond. The words hit the air and shattered. 1,000 gasps from the crowd were a distant hiss. He lifted his hand, palm out, and spoke the ancient, cursed words of unmaking. By blood and by moon I sever the thread. I break this union. I cast out this fate. It didn't hurt. Not at first. For a single, blessed second, there was nothing. Then, a soundless crack echoed in the deepest part of my soul. It was the sound of my world breaking in half. A blinding, sterile whiteness flooded my vision, wiping away the moonlight, the trees, the faces, the constant, warm hum of our bond. The connection that had been the background music of my entire life wasn't ripped away. It was erased. It just stopped. The silence it left behind was absolute. A void. A nothingness so profound it sucked the very air from my lungs. The world rushed back, but it was wrong. The colors were dull, washed out, as if I were seeing them through a film of gray dust. The scent of pine was just wood. The magic was gone. My knees gave out, and the damp earth that met my hands was just cold dirt. I had not been rejected. I had been erased. Chapter 5. An Ember in the Ash. The ground was cold. It was a real, solid thing in a world that had just dissolved into smoke. I could feel it seeping through the thin fabric of my ceremonial dress, a damp chill that touched my skin, but couldn't get anywhere near the frozen abyss inside me. Whispers started to crawl through the silence, hushed sounds of pity, of horror, of morbid curiosity. They were talking about me, the broken thing in the center of the clearing. A voice in my head, a voice that sounded like weeping, told me to stay down. Just lie here. Let the earth take you. It's over. It was a sweet, tempting song. So easy. Just give up. But then another voice answered. It was a voice I had never heard before. It was deeper, harsher. It came from that new, empty space inside me, a single furious spark in the void. No. The word was a shock of heat. Get up. My fingers dug into the soil. My arms trembled with the effort. He did not get to do this. He did not get to unmake me and leave me here as a monument to his ambition. He did not get to win so easily. The rage was a welcome pain. It was something to feel other than the horrifying nothingness. It was an ember in the ash, and I fed it with every ounce of my will. I pushed myself to my knees. A few pack members flinched, as if my rising was an unnatural act. Maybe it was. I should have been destroyed. Then I got to my feet. The world was still gray and muted, but it was steady now. I stood before Damon, covered in dirt, my soul in tatters, and I felt taller. He actually took a half step back, his eyes wide with a flicker of disbelief. He had expected tears. He had planned for a collapse. He had not planned for this. I walked toward him until the space between us was heavy and charged. I leaned in close, so my words were for him and him alone, yet the entire pack seemed to hold its breath to hear them. My voice was not my own. It was a hoarse, ragged whisper that was somehow sharper than a scream. You will regret the day you threw me away like dirt. It was a vow. It was a curse. For a heartbeat, true fear flashed in his eyes. From the edge of the clearing, I felt a gaze on me, heavy and intense. The Northern King. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his head was tilted slightly, his focus absolute. He was watching this unfold with the curiosity of a scholar studying a rare, violent phenomenon. Damon, desperate to reclaim his moment, to erase the chilling effect of my words, recoiled from me. He turned his back, a deliberate final insult. He strode to where Clarissa stood, her face a mask of smug victory. Clarissa, he boomed, his voice artificially loud. With no bond to hold me, I am free to choose a mate who will bring strength to this pack. I choose you. He grabbed her hand, lifting it for all to see. I asked the Alpha for his blessing. Chapter 6. The King's Gaze. The Alpha, Marcus, stood frozen for a moment, the silence stretching thin and tight. He was a political animal, and he was weighing his options. On one side was tradition, the sanctity of a fated bond that had just been desecrated. On the other was a powerful new alliance, his beta, the future leader, bound to his own daughter. He glanced once towards the shadows where the Northern King stood watching, as if trying to gauge the reaction of the greater power. Then he made his choice. "A leader must make sacrifices for the good of his pack," Marcus announced, his voice a heavy, final judgment. "This union will ensure a strong future for Crescent Ridge. I grant my blessing." It was done. My betrayal was now officially sanctioned. Justified. It was for the greater good. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The pack, taking its cue from the Alpha, erupted in hesitant murmurs of congratulations. They swarmed the new golden couple, their loyalty shifting like sand in the wind. A circle of empty space formed around me. I was an island of shame, an infection. Friends I had known my whole life shuffled past, their eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to meet my gaze. I was invisible. I was a ghost watching my own funeral. It felt like I was underwater, the sounds of their celebration muffled and distant. The world was a dull, blurry painting I was no longer a part of. They had cut me out of the picture. Then, through the crowd, I saw movement. The Northern delegation was leaving. They moved like shadows, silent and swift, melting back into the forest. Their king, Cale Draven, was the last to go. At the edge of the clearing, he stopped. He turned his head, his body still facing the forest, and his storm-gray eyes cut through the celebrating pack, through the haze of my despair, and found mine. He didn't offer pity. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer anything but a look. A long, piercing, and utterly profound look. It was a gaze that did not see a broken girl. It saw the rage I was hiding. It saw the promise I had just made. It was a look that acknowledged the steel that had just been forged in the fire of my ruin. There was a flicker in those gray depths, a glint of something sharp, dangerous, and maybe, just maybe, appreciative. Then he was gone. The invisible connection, that fleeting moment of being truly seen, was the only thing holding me together. It was a question mark hanging in the empty air. It was a hook that snagged on the edge of my soul, keeping me from drifting away entirely. I finally tore my eyes from the spot where he had stood. I looked at the happy couple, at the pack that had discarded me. My hand, hidden in the folds of my ruined dress, clenched into a fist, my nails biting into my palm. The physical pain was a welcome distraction. My old life was a pile of ash at my feet. Fine. I would build a new one on top of it. Chapter 7. The Haunting of a Ghost. The next morning, the sun rose as if nothing had happened. It was a liar. Its light felt thin and cold, and the cheerful birdsong in the trees sounded like a mockery. In the ruins of my life, the world dared to be beautiful. I moved through the pack grounds like a ghost, a half-thing that was seen but never acknowledged. The world was still gray, the vibrant colors of my home bleached into a dull, monotonous landscape of shame. They had a name for wolves like me, Ashen, the ones whose bonds were broken, whose souls were left with a permanent scar. We were considered bad luck, a walking reminder of a promise broken. My friends, wolves I had shared my first hunt with, women I had tended to in childbirth, would turn their backs when I approached. Their conversations would die, their laughter freezing on the air, only to resume in hushed whispers the moment I had passed. It was a social death, and it was brutally effective. I refused to hide. I went to the healing den because it was the only piece of my old life I had left. My hands still knew how to grind herbs. My mind still knew how to set a bone. This they could not take from me. "What are you doing here?" The voice was sharp and laced with venom. Clarissa stood in the doorway, flanked by two of her friends. She wore her new status like a crown, her chin high, her eyes glittering with smug satisfaction. She was the beta's chosen. She was important. I didn't look up from the poultice I was mixing. "My job. Your job," she scoffed, a nasty little laugh. Your job was to be a good little fated and not get thrown away. You're a stain on this pack, Arya, a bad omen. No one wants your tainted hands on them. Her words were meant to be daggers. And they were. But I was so full of wounds already. What were a few more? I kept my focus on my work, my silence a shield she didn't know how to penetrate. Her frustration grew. Damon sees it now, you know. She pressed on, stepping closer. He told me it was like a fog had lifted. He said he feels free, strong. He needed a wolf of power, not some weepy little mender. That one hit its mark. A tremor went through my hand. Damon had said that? After a lifetime of promises? He felt free? Before Clarissa could press her advantage, a shadow fell over the entrance of the den. A massive figure blocked the morning sun, plunging the small space into twilight. One of the northern guards stood there, silent and imposing as a mountain. His winter gray eyes were fixed on me. He didn't acknowledge Clarissa or her friends. To him, they didn't even exist. He spoke one word, his voice a low rumble of shifting stone. Come. Clarissa and her friends were stunned into silence. The guard turned and began to walk away, fully expecting me to follow. The entire pack, which had been pretending not to watch our confrontation, was now staring openly. Whispers erupted. What was happening? Why was the king's personal guard summoning the rejected one? For the first time since that night, I met Clarissa's gaze. I saw the confusion, the frustration, and the flicker of fear in her eyes. It was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. Without a word, I wiped my hands, set down my bowl, and walked out of the den, following the silent northern wolf. I had no idea if I was being led to an execution or a strange, incomprehensible salvation. Chapter 8. The King's Command. The lodge where the northern delegation was staying felt like a different country. The air inside was colder, scented with the unfamiliar smell of pine from a distant forest, and wood smoke from a stone hearth. Furs the color of snow and shadow were draped over the rough-hewn furniture. It was a place of quiet, absolute power. I stood in the center of the main room, feeling small and out of place. A stray mountain cat in a lion's den. King Cale Draven was standing by the fire, staring into the flames. He didn't turn when I entered, but I knew he was aware of me. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was forcing me to wait, a simple and effective reminder of who was in control. My unease curdled into resentment. I was not a dog to be summoned and made to heel. Finally, he turned. Those storm-gray eyes swept over me, from my dirt-stained dress to the defiant set of my jaw. It was an unnerving, clinical assessment. Your pack has discarded you, he stated. It wasn't a question or an accusation. It was a simple fact. My pack has made its choice, I countered, my voice tight. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, passed over his scarred face. Yes, they have, a foolish one. He took a step closer, and I had to fight the instinct to retreat. He was immense, a force of nature contained in the shape of a man. My delegation will be in these mountains for some time. I require a local guide who knows the terrain and a healer familiar with the plants of this region. I stared at him, my mind racing. What was this? Our alpha can provide you with his best hunters and healers. I don't want his best, Cale said, his voice a low growl. I want someone who is skilled, someone who is unaffiliated. He let the word hang in the air, a deliberate, calculated insult. He was pointing out that my disgrace made me useful. Because my loyalty was no longer promised to the pack's leadership, I was a free agent, a tool he could use. You will serve as my personal healer and guide for the duration of my stay. It was an order. Fury, hot and sharp, pierced through my numbness. He was playing some kind of game, and I was the pawn. No. The word, quiet as it was, seemed to shake the very air in the room. His eyes narrowed. No one said no to the Alpha King. It was not a request, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am not a slave to be commanded. I shot back, my own rage surprising me. I will not be an object of your pity or your political games. He closed the distance between us in a single silent step. He loomed over me, and the sheer force of his presence was a physical weight. He smelled of cold air and old leather. Do you think this is pity? He murmured, his gray eyes boring into mine. Pity is for the weak. I watched you the other night. You are many things, little wolf, but you are not weak. He paused, his gaze so intense I felt it could see right through to my fractured soul. I want to see the wolf that makes promises in the dark, be at the training grounds at dawn. He turned his back on me then, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. I was trapped. He had offered me a different kind of cage, one with a far more dangerous keeper. I was bound to him now, not by fate, but by a king's unyielding command, and I had absolutely no idea why. Chapter 9. A Different Kind of Cage. Dawn was a thin gray line on the horizon when I arrived at the training grounds. The air was cold enough to steal my breath, each exhale a puff of white mist. He was already there, a dark silhouette against the growing light. Kyle stood in the center of the packed earth arena, his presence absorbing the quiet of the morning. He wasn't practicing. He was waiting. For me. My anger from yesterday had cooled into a hard, defiant resolve. He wanted to see the wolf who made promises? Fine. He would. I would not cower. I would not show fear. I walked into the arena, my steps sure, my head held high. He turned to face me, his storm gray eyes missing nothing. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply walked to the weapon rack and pulled out 2 wooden practice knives. He tossed one to me. It spun through the air, and I caught it on instinct, the smooth, worn wood unfamiliar in my healer's hands. What is this? I asked, my voice sharp. A test, he said simply. He settled into a relaxed fighting stance, the wooden blade held loosely in his hand. You have a fire in you. I want to see if it's the kind that can forge steel or if it's just the kind that burns out. He was insane. I was a mender, not a fighter. This wasn't a test. It was a humiliation. But the look in his eyes told me that refusing was not an option, and a deeper part of me, the part that was furious at the world, didn't want to refuse. I wanted to fight. I wanted to hit something. Fine, I spat, gripping the knife. He came at me. It wasn't a real attack, it was a fluid, probing movement. I stumbled back, clumsy and slow. He was a blur of controlled motion, a dance of deadly grace. He wasn't even trying. He flowed around my desperate, clumsy blocks, his wooden blade tapping my shoulder, my ribs, my arm. A dozen times he could have killed me. But he didn't. He was testing my defenses, my reactions, my spirit. Frustration boiled over into fury. He was toying with me. I let out a yell and charged, abandoning all technique. I used my smaller size to my advantage, ducking under his arm, trying to get inside his reach. For a moment, I surprised him. My blade skittered off his ribs. It wasn't a real blow, but it was contact. His eyes flashed. The game was over. He moved with a speed that was not entirely natural. One moment he was in front of me, the next he was behind me. My wrist was caught in an iron grip. The knife was twisted from my hand. An arm snaked around my waist, and my feet were swept out from under me. The world spun. I landed on my back with a hard thump, the air knocked from my lungs. Before I could even gasp, he was there, pinning me. His body was a heavy, warm weight, his legs bracketing mine, one hand pinning both of my wrists in the dirt above my head. The fight was over in a single, shocking heartbeat. We were chest to chest, face to face, so close. I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the faint lines of exhaustion around them. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the clean scent of the cold morning on him. My breath hitched. My heart, which had been pounding with adrenaline, now pounded with something else entirely, something terrifying and new. He stared down at me, his breathing as harsh as mine. The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken things. "There it is," he murmured, his voice a low, rough growl that vibrated through my whole body. "The fire." Chapter 10. A King's Protection. His words, "the fire," echoed in the silent space between us. I was still pinned beneath him, my wrists held in a grip that was not painful, but absolute. The world was nothing but the storm in his eyes and the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs. This was not the gentle healer from the den. This was not the broken girl from the ceremony. This was something new, something feral, and he had been the one to call it out of me. He had seen the rage, and he had not been afraid of it. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, the intensity in his gaze softened just a fraction. He released my wrists and pushed himself off me in one fluid motion, leaving me feeling strangely cold and exposed on the hard-packed earth. He offered me a hand. For a second, I just stared at it. A large, calloused hand that could have easily crushed me. Hesitantly, I took it. His grip was firm as he pulled me to my feet. "You fight with your heart, not your head," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a criticism. It was an observation. "That will get you killed." "I'm not a warrior," I retorted, brushing the dirt from my clothes, my skin still tingling where he had touched me. "No," he agreed, his eyes sweeping over me once more. "You are not." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the center of the arena, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of fear, fury, and a terrifying, unfamiliar spark of something else, something that felt dangerously like desire. That evening, a formal feast was held in the main hall. It was a tense affair. As Kale's official guide, I was required to sit at the high table with him, a position that put me directly in the line of sight of every wolf in the pack. I could feel their stares. I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. Damon and Clarissa sat opposite us, putting on a sickeningly sweet display of affection. He would whisper in her ear, and she would laugh, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my last nerve. It was all a performance, a desperate attempt to show the pack, and perhaps the king, that he had made the right choice. I focused on my plate, trying to become invisible. It didn't work. "Looks like even the king enjoys picking up strays," a loud voice slurred from a nearby table. I froze. It was a warrior named Kalen, one of Damon's closest friends. He was drunk, his face flushed, his eyes filled with drunken bravado. "Careful, Kalen," another wolf chuckled. "Maybe she'll mix you a love potion. Isn't that how a weak she-wolf climbs into a king's bed?" The hall grew quiet. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen. I felt my cheeks burn with a fresh wave of humiliation. Before I could even think, there was a blur of movement beside me. It was impossibly fast. A dark shape, a rush of air, and then a sickening thud. Kalen was on the floor, gasping for air, with Kale's boot on his chest. The king hadn't even stood up completely. He was leaning over the table, his face a mask of cold, lethal fury. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so primal it silenced every whisper, every breath in the hall. "Say her name with respect," Kyle snarled, his voice a deadly whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "Or you will lose your tongue." Chapter 11. What Belongs to a King. The rest of the feast passed in a thick, suffocating tension. Kalen had scrambled away with a whimpered apology, and no one else dared to even look in my direction. I should have felt relieved, vindicated. Instead, I felt like a prize that had just been won, a piece of property that had been publicly defended. The king's protection was not a gentle shield. It was a heavy, gilded cage, and its bars were closing in around me. I needed to breathe. Making a quiet excuse, I slipped out of the great hall and onto a stone balcony that overlooked the valley. The night air was cool and clean, a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. The moon was high and bright, the same moon that had witnessed my complete undoing. How could something so beautiful be so cruel? Running away? The voice made me jump. Damon. He stood in the shadows at the edge of the balcony, his arms crossed, his face a mask of bitter resentment. The charming Beta was gone. This was the wolf I had seen in the clearing, cold, ambitious, and possessive. "I'm not running from anything," I said, turning my back to him, focusing on the distant mountains. "Certainly not from you." "Don't lie," he hissed, stepping closer. I could feel the heat of his anger. "What is your game, Arya? Did you plan this all along, seducing the king the moment he arrived?" I spun around, my own anger flaring. "Seduce him? You threw me away. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You don't get to question my motives." "I did what I had to do for the pack," he insisted, his voice rising. "And you still belong to me. Fate doesn't just disappear because I said a few words. There's a reason the king is toying with you, and it has nothing to do with what he wants. It's about me." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "He's trying to show his dominance, to take what is mine, but you are not his to take. Do you understand?" His touch was like a brand, a horrifying reminder of a connection that was now just a phantom limb. I tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "Let go of me, Damon. Not until you—" "Let her go." The voice was not loud. It was a low, guttural snarl that came from the doorway, a sound of pure, undiluted menace. Kyle stood there, a shadow brought to life. His winter gray eyes were not on me. They were fixed on Damon's hand, which was still clamped around my arm. The temperature on the balcony seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Damon froze, his face paling. He had challenged a Beta's authority before. This was different. This was a king. Kale took a slow, deliberate step forward, his movements utterly silent. He was a predator stalking his prey. His gaze lifted from Damon's hand to his eyes, and the raw, untamed power that rolled off him was suffocating. "Touch what's mine again," Kale growled, the words vibrating with a deadly promise. "And I will tear your throat out." Chapter 12, The Poison of Whispers. Damon released my arm as if he'd been burned. He stumbled back, a mixture of fear and humiliated fury warring on his face. He shot me one last venomous look before turning and practically fleeing back into the great hall. He had been utterly and completely dominated. The standoff was over before it had even begun. I was left alone on the balcony with the king, the silence between us crackling with the aftermath of his claim. Mine. The word echoed in my head. He had said it. He had declared it. Not as a political statement or a show of protection. He had said it with the raw, possessive instinct of a wolf claiming his territory. He had claimed me. I looked at him, standing there in the moonlight, a creature of shadows and power. Who was this man? What did he want from me? My heart was a frantic, terrified mess. He simply gave me a long, unreadable look before turning and melting back into the hall, leaving me to grapple with the impossible new reality of my life. The next day, the entire pack was buzzing. The whispers that had followed me before were now a roaring torrent. I was no longer just the poor, rejected Arya. I was something else entirely, something dangerous, something powerful. I was the king's. The pack was divided. Some looked at me with a newfound, fearful respect. Others, the ones loyal to Damon and Clarissa, looked at me with open hostility. I was a lightning rod for the tension that had gripped our home. The most dangerous whispers, I soon learned, came from Clarissa. Her public humiliation, first Damon's interest in me, then the king's, had curdled her ambition into pure poison. I was walking past the communal kitchens when I heard her voice, sweet and venomous, drifting through the open window. "It's not natural," she was saying to a group of young she-wolves who hung on her every word. "No one just catches the king's eye like that, not after being cast out as unworthy. It's a curse, or worse, a spell." "A spell," one of the girls whispered, her voice a mix of fear and excitement. "Of course," Clarissa said with absolute certainty. She works with herbs and roots, doesn't she? Dark things. She's clouded his mind. He's a great king, but even the strongest alpha can be brought low by a cunning, desperate female. She's a disease, and she's trying to infect our pack from the top down. I froze, my blood turning to ice. She wasn't just mocking me anymore. She was painting me as a villain, a witch. In a world of superstition and primal fears, that was a death sentence. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. This was no longer about a broken heart or a lost place. My life was in danger. I was caught in a lethal game I didn't understand, with a jealous rival actively trying to have me destroyed, and my only protector was a terrifying, enigmatic king whose motives were a complete mystery. Chapter 13. The King's Decree. The Great Hall was a pit of snakes. Ever since Clarissa had started her campaign of poison, the air had been thick with it. I could feel the hostile stares, the suspicious whispers that followed me like a cloud of biting flies. I sat beside Kale at the high table, a position that should have granted me respect, but instead made me a bigger target. He had commanded my presence, and so here I was, on display for their hatred. Clarissa and Damon sat opposite, the perfect, charming couple accepting praise from the pack while their allies shot venomous glares my way. The tension finally snapped when Clarissa rose, a goblet of wine in her hand, a sweet, malicious smile on her lips. "A toast," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall, "to the strength of our pack, and to the wisdom of our leaders who know to protect themselves from outside influences. We must all be wary of strange, desperate magic that can cloud the minds of even the greatest alphas." It was a declaration of war, a direct, public accusation. She was calling the king a fool and me a witch in the same breath. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Damon looked on with a smug sense of approval. He was letting his new mate fight his battles for him. I felt my blood run cold. This was it. She was trying to force his hand, to make him cast me aside to prove he wasn't under some spell. Kale did not move. He simply set his own goblet down with a soft, deliberate click that sounded like a death knell in the silent room. He turned his head slowly and looked at Clarissa. He didn't say a word. He just looked. And under the weight of that cold, glacial stare, Clarissa's smug smile faltered. The color drained from her face. She sat down abruptly, the challenge dying in her throat. Then Kyle rose to his full, imposing height. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with his power. He reached down and took my arm, his grip firm, and pulled me to my feet to stand beside him. His other hand settled on the small of my back, a gesture of undeniable possession. He faced the pack, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over every single wolf, daring them to meet his gaze. "There seems to be some confusion in this pack about where loyalties lie," he began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that needed no volume to command absolute attention. "So let me make it perfectly clear." His hand on my back was a brand of heat, staking his claim. "Arya Thorne is not a guest here. She is not a servant. From this day forward, she is mine." He let the words sink in, a stone dropping into a deep, silent well. An insult to her is a direct insult to me. A threat against her is a threat against the North. Anyone who touches her, anyone who speaks ill of her, touches their king. A collective, terrified silence was his answer. Damon's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Clarissa looked as if she had been slapped. Kale had not just defended me. He had drawn a battle line, and he had placed me squarely at his side. He had made me untouchable. Without another word, he turned, his hand still firmly on my back, and guided me out of the great hall. We walked through the parting sea of stunned wolves, leaving a wake of shattered assumptions and absolute dread. I was no longer an outcast. I was a king's decree, and I was more terrified than I had ever been in my life. Chapter 14. The Scar on His Soul. The moment the heavy oak door of his chambers slammed shut behind us, I tore myself from his grasp. "What was that?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and fear. What are you doing? You can't just declare me yours. I am not a piece of property you can claim in your game with Damon. This has nothing to do with that pathetic beta, Kale roared back, his own control finally snapping. He advanced on me, his eyes blazing with a raw wildfire I had never seen before. Do you think I care about his petty pride? I saw what they were doing to you. I heard the poison they were speaking. I will not allow it. So you make me your possession instead? I shot back, refusing to back down even as he crowded me against the cold stone wall. You trap me in a gilded cage and call it protection? I will not trade one master for another. I am not your master, he snarled, his hands slamming against the wall on either side of my head, caging me in completely. He was so close, the heat from his body was a furnace, his scent, pine and winter air, overwhelming my senses. He struggled for the words, his chest heaving. His fury was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. A raw, desperate hunger. The anger between us melted away, leaving behind a raw, crackling tension. The argument had been the last barrier, and now it was gone. All that was left was this undeniable, terrifying pull. His stormy eyes dropped to my lips, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Arya, he whispered, and my name was a prayer and a curse on his lips. He crashed his mouth down on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a storm. A desperate, hungry claiming that spoke of years of loneliness and tightly leashed control. I gasped, and he took the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his tongue tangling with mine. All the fight went out of me, replaced by a flood of pure, aching need. My hands came up to fist in his tunic, pulling him closer. I had been so empty, so broken, and his touch was a fire that promised to burn away the cold. His kisses trailed from my mouth to my jaw, down the sensitive column of my throat. I arched my head back, giving him access, my entire body humming with a pleasure so intense it was almost painful. My wolf was clawing at the inside of my skin, screaming for him. For this. He found the spot, the tender flesh just above my collarbone, where a mating mark belonged. I felt the heat of his breath, then the sharp, exquisite pressure as his fangs extended, grazing my skin. Yes, my soul screamed. Claim me. Mark me. Make me yours. A violent shudder went through him. He tore himself away from me as if he'd been burned, a guttural snarl ripping from his chest. He stumbled back, his face a mask of pure agony and self-loathing. He looked at me, his eyes wild with a pain so deep it stole my breath. I can't, he choked out, his voice raw. Fate is a lie, a curse. He ran a hand over his face, over the scar that cut through his brow. My first mate. She was fate's choice, and she betrayed me. She led the rogues to my door. The air crackled with the ghost of his past. The scar on his face was nothing compared to the one on his soul. Get out, he growled, not looking at me, his control shattered. Leave, now. I fled, my own body aching with unfulfilled desire, my heart breaking for a reason I had never expected. He had claimed me in front of the world only to reject me in the dark. Chapter 15. A Whisper of Silver. I stumbled back to my small borrowed room, my body a war of conflicting sensations. Every nerve ending was still on fire from Kale's touch, a humming electric current of pure need. My wolf was a frantic, wounded thing inside me, howling in confusion and frustration. It had felt the promise of a bond, the undeniable rightness of his teeth against my skin, only to have it violently snatched away. The whiplash was dizzying, leaving me breathless and aching in a way that felt deeper than just physical. I paced the small space like a caged animal. How could he do that? How could he show me that desperate, all-consuming passion, and then push me away as if I were poison? She betrayed me. His words echoed in my head, raw and full of a pain that was still fresh, even after all these years. He wasn't just a cold, powerful king. He was a wolf who had been broken by the one thing our world held sacred, the fated bond. And now he was terrified of it. Terrified of me. A strange energy was thrumming under my skin. It was a hot, restless pressure building in my chest, demanding release. It wasn't just desire, it was something else, something wilder. I had to shift. Now. The room was too small, the walls were closing in. I needed the forest. I needed the moon. Slipping out into the night, I ran for the cover of the ancient trees. The moment I was clear of the pack grounds, I gave in to the change. The familiar sensation of bones shifting, of skin stretching, was different this time. It was more intense, hotter. A surge of raw, untamed power flooded my veins, a current so strong it made me gasp. The change was faster, more fluid than ever before, as if something deep inside me had finally been unlocked. I stood on 4 paws, my senses exploding. The scent of damp earth, the sound of a beetle crawling on a leaf, the feel of the cool night air on my fur. It was all magnified, sharper than I had ever experienced. My body felt stronger, lighter, humming with this new, strange power. I felt an urge to run, to let my paws tear up the forest floor. I bounded through the trees, a blur of motion, feeling a freedom I hadn't felt since before the rejection. I eventually found my way to a small, hidden pool, its surface a perfect, still mirror of the night sky. I dipped my head to drink, the cold water a balm on my tongue. Then I saw my reflection, and I froze. It was me, but it wasn't. My fur had always been a plain, earthy brown, the color of the forest floor. But now, woven through the familiar coat, were streaks of something else. Not the gray of age or the white of a scar. It was silver. Pure, luminous silver that seemed to capture the moonlight and glow with a soft, ethereal light of its own. Thin, elegant threads of it traced paths along my spine, my shoulders, and the tips of my ears. I stared, my wolf's heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't normal. I had never seen or heard of anything like this. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. The rejection, the king's claim, the violent surge of passion and pain. It hadn't just broken my heart. It had awakened something inside me, something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. I was no longer just Arya, the rejected healer. I was something else, something new, and I had no idea what it meant. Chapter 16. Shadows in the Ridge. A fragile, unspoken truce had settled between me and Kale in the days following his rejection. He was the king, and I was his guide. We moved through the mountains in a tense, professional silence, the ghost of that night's passion a constant, invisible wall between us. He was all cold authority again, the vulnerable wolf locked away behind a mask of iron. I didn't push. I had my own secrets to guard. Each night, I would sneak into the deep woods to shift, to feel the strange new power thrumming in my veins. The silver in my fur seemed to grow brighter, and I felt stronger, faster, different. I was living in a world of secrets, a stranger to the pack, to the king, and even to myself. It was this new, heightened awareness that made me notice them. The shadows that didn't belong. I was gathering herbs near the eastern ridge when I first heard it. Voices. Low and urgent. I dropped into a crouch behind a thicket of ferns, my heart starting a slow, heavy drum. It was Damon, speaking with 2 warriors I knew were fiercely loyal to him. "The rogue patrols are in place," Damon was saying, his voice a low hiss. "They'll move on the full moon. The payment is guaranteed once the king is dealt with." My blood ran cold. Payment? Rogues? Rogues were feral, honorless wolves who had been cast out of their packs. To ally with them was the ultimate treason, a crime punishable by immediate death. Damon was not just trying to undermine Kale. He was planning to murder him. My first instinct was to run, to tell Kale, to tell anyone. But who would believe me? The jilted female accusing the beloved beta of an unthinkable crime. It sounded like the ravings of a broken heart. I needed more. A few days later, I saw the other piece of the puzzle. Damon was speaking with Elder Theron near the edge of the clearing. Theron was one of the most respected members of our pack, a quiet, traditional wolf who had advised the Alpha for decades. He was the last person anyone would ever suspect of treachery. He listened to Damon with a grave expression, then placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It looked like a wise elder comforting an ambitious young beta. But my gut, now honed by betrayal, screamed that it was wrong. It was the calm, steady confidence of a co-conspirator. The web was bigger and far more dangerous than I had imagined. It wasn't just Damon's jealousy. This was a conspiracy, woven into the very fabric of my pack. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place that evening. I saw Elder Theron leaving the King's Lodge, laughing and sharing a warm farewell with one of Kael's most trusted northern commanders. The commander clapped Theron on the back, a gesture of deep respect and friendship. The serpent was not just in our den, it was coiled right at the king's hearth. He was trusted. He had access. And I was the only one who saw the fangs hidden behind his kindly smile. I had no choice. I had to warn Kael, even if it meant my own destruction. Chapter 17. The Poison of Doubt. My hands were trembling as I requested an audience with the king. I was escorted to the war room, a chamber that smelled of old maps and polished steel. Kael was there, bent over a table with his commanders, and standing with them, a respected guest in their council, was Elder Theron. My heart sank. This was going to be even harder than I thought. "Your Majesty," I began, my voice barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again, forcing strength into my words. "I must speak with you. It's a matter of urgent security." Kael straightened up, his brow furrowed. He dismissed his commanders, but gestured for Theron to stay. "Elder Theron is advising us on local matters. He can remain." There was no way around it. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The conversation I'd overheard about the rogues, Damon's talk of payment, the secret meeting I had seen between him and the elder. I spoke quickly, passionately, my words tumbling over one another in their urgency. As I spoke, I watched Theron's face. He didn't look guilty. He looked disappointed, sad, as if he were listening to the ramblings of a sick child. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Kael's face was unreadable, his gray eyes searching mine. Before he could speak, Theron let out a long, mournful sigh. "Oh, Your Majesty," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The poor girl, can you not see how her rejection has wounded her mind? She is broken. She sees shadows and conspiracies in every corner because her heart cannot accept what has happened." He turned his kind, grandfatherly eyes on me. "Arya, my dear, Damon has hurt you terribly, but to invent such monstrous lies?" He then faced Kael again, his expression grave. "The boy is ambitious, it is true, but he is loyal to this pack. It is Arya who has a motive for revenge. Is it not possible that this is the real trap?" Theron's voice dropped, becoming thoughtful and persuasive. "Perhaps she hopes you will eliminate her rival for her. Perhaps she is working with the rogues herself, promising them a share of the power once both you and Damon are out of the way." The words hit Kael like a physical blow, a female he had taken under his protection, manipulating him to get rid of another male, using rogues as pawns. It was the exact blueprint of his first mate's betrayal. I saw the change happen in his eyes. The flicker of trust I had worked so hard to kindle was instantly, brutally extinguished. All the warmth vanished, replaced by the glacial ice of his oldest wound. His face became a mask of cold, impenetrable suspicion. He looked at me as if I were a stranger again, a beautiful, venomous snake. His voice was quiet, but it shattered what was left of my heart. "How do I know you're not lying?" It wasn't a question. It was a conviction. He didn't believe me. After everything, he did not believe me. The one person who I thought saw the real me now saw a traitor. This was my lowest point. Not the rejection, not the shunning. This was true despair. "There will be a formal Royal Council meeting tonight to discuss this security threat," Kyle announced, his cold gaze never leaving my face. "You will attend." I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that the council wasn't for discussion. It was a trap. And I was walking into it as the bait. Chapter 18. The Council of Vipers. The Great Hall was arranged not for a feast, but for a trial. A long, heavy table dominated the room. Kale sat at its head, a king carved from stone, his face an unreadable mask of grim authority. His northern commanders were arranged along one side. On the other sat Elder Theron, Damon, and two of his most loyal warriors, present under the guise of pack security. I was made to stand near Kale's side, not as a counselor, but as a prisoner awaiting her sentence. The air was thick with paranoia, a suffocating blanket of unspoken accusations and simmering violence. Kale's eyes were cold. Every time I tried to meet his gaze, he would look away, his jaw tight. He was watching me, yes, but with the weary suspicion of a man expecting a knife in his back. My heart ached with a pain that was sharp and fresh. He had already convicted me in his mind. Meanwhile, I was desperately watching Damon and Theron, looking for any sign, any tell, any flicker of guilt that would prove I was right. They were calm, composed, the picture of loyal subjects. The meeting began. Kale spoke of the increased rogue activity in the region, his words clipped and formal. He was testing the waters, watching everyone's reactions. Damon offered his reports, his voice steady, his concern for the pack's safety seemingly genuine. It was a masterful performance. I felt like I was going insane. Was I the only one who could see the vipers coiled at the table? Then it happened. Elder Theron, in the middle of a sentence about reinforcing patrols along the northern ridge, reached for his goblet of wine. He picked it up and with his thumb tapped the silver base of the cup 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. It was a tiny, insignificant gesture, but it was a signal. I saw Damon's eyes flicker for a split second. It was real. It was happening. "Kale, look out!" I screamed, but it was too late. Chaos erupted. The main doors of the hall burst open, and a flood of ragged, snarling rogues poured in. At the same instant, the 2 security warriors with Damon spun around, their blades flashing as they attacked Kale's commanders from behind. It was a coordinated assault, from within and without. In the ensuing mayhem, Elder Theron rose from his seat. But he didn't move toward the king. He drew a wicked-looking curved dagger from beneath his robes, its edge gleaming with a sickly green poison. With shocking speed, he lunged at Kale's second-in-command, a massive northern wolf named Gunnar, and plunged the blade deep into his side. Gunnar roared in pain and surprise, his strength already failing as the poison took hold. The trusted elder was a traitor. Everything was happening at once. The clash of steel, the snarls of fighting wolves, the screams of the wounded. In the middle of it all, Damon, his face a mask of triumphant fury, finally made his move. He drew his own sword and charged directly at the king. But Kale was distracted. His head had whipped around at my scream, his eyes still clouded with that fatal seed of doubt I had seen planted there. He was looking at me, trying to figure out if this was my trap, even as the real one sprang shut around him. That single moment of hesitation was all it took. A massive rogue, armed with a crude battle axe, broke through the guard's line, his eyes blazing with bloodlust. He was charging at Kale's exposed back. The king was vulnerable. The trap was sprung. And it was my warning, the very warning he had refused to believe, that had sealed his fate. Chapter 19. A debt of blood time broke. It shattered into 1,000 tiny, sharp-edged pieces. In one piece, I saw the crude axe swinging through the air, a dark crescent of death. In another, I saw Kale's face, his expression a storm of confusion and dawning horror, his body tensing a second too late. In a third, I saw Damon's triumphant sneer from across the room. He was going to win. They were all going to win. And the king, The only person who had seen even a flicker of my true self was going to die because he had not trusted me. There was no thought, there was no plan, there was no heroic decision. My body moved before my mind could catch up. It was pure, primal instinct, a desperate, soul-deep need to protect the one wolf who, despite his own brokenness, had shielded me. I didn't scream a warning. There wasn't time. I launched myself forward. My shoulder slammed into the solid wall of his back, shoving him forward, out of the axe's path. His surprised grunt was loud in my ear. For a split second, I was wrapped in his scent, pine and winter and power, and a strange, wild part of me thought, at last. Then the world exploded in pure, white-hot agony. The axe meant for his spine found my back and shoulder instead. There was a sickening, splintering crunch as the metal bit deep, shattering bone. A scream tore from my throat, raw and animalistic. The force of the blow threw me from him, and I hit the stone floor in a crumpled heap. The pain was a living thing. A fire that consumed my entire being, burning away thought, burning away everything but the searing, blinding reality of the wound. The coppery scent of my own blood filled the air. It was everywhere. Through a haze of darkening vision, I saw Kyle. He had stumbled forward from my push, and he turned just in time to see the axe being pulled free from my body. He saw me on the floor. He saw the lifeblood pouring from the grievous wound. His face, it changed. The suspicion, the doubt, the cold authority, it all vanished, burned away by a sudden volcanic eruption of pure, incandescent rage. The woman he had suspected of being a viper had just thrown herself in the path of a killing blow meant for him. His deepest fear, the scar on his soul that had dictated his every action, was proven utterly, devastatingly wrong. A roar of pure, primal fury ripped from his throat. It was not the sound of a king or an alpha. It was the sound of a mate seeing his other half struck down. It was a sound of absolute, world-ending anguish. My vision began to tunnel, the sounds of the battle fading into a distant, muffled roar. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was his face, a mask of torment, as he turned on the rogue who had struck me. I had saved his life, but I was dying. And in my final, fading thought, I realized with a strange sense of peace that it had been worth it. Chapter 20. The Awakening of Silver. The darkness was not an end. It was a strange, quiet place, a muffled void where the searing pain was a distant echo. I was floating, disconnected from the broken body on the floor. The sounds of battle were far away, like a storm on a distant horizon. I was drifting, fading. But then, something else began. A heat. It started in the wound, a warm, pulsing sensation that began to push back against the cold tide of death. It wasn't the angry fire of the injury. This was different. It was a clean electric warmth, a hum of ancient, dormant power stirring to life. My blood, pooling on the ancient stones of the great hall, began to glow. From the chaos of the battle, Kyle saw it. He had just ripped the throat from the rogue who had felled me, his fury a black storm. He turned back to me, a desperate, wounded sound in his chest, and he froze. The blood on the floor was shimmering with a soft, silver light. The light pulsed, and the warmth in my veins surged, becoming a river of fire. It flooded my body, 1,000 times more intense than the pain of the axe. It was a fire that was not burning me, but reforging me. It slammed into every cell, every bone, every fiber of my being and demanded a change. My broken bones began to knit together with audible cracks and pops. My torn flesh began to weave itself shut. A scream of pure, agonizing power ripped from my throat as the change took me. It was not the familiar shift of a wolf. This was an eruption, a detonation of the soul. A blast of pure silver light exploded from my body, throwing everyone, rogue and pack wolf alike, backwards. The hall was filled with a blinding, ethereal glow, and where a broken, dying girl had lain, something else now stood. A wolf. But a wolf of myth and legend. She was immense, larger than any wolf in the hall. larger even than Kale. Her fur was a swirling mix of the earthy brown I had always known and a brilliant, luminous silver that seemed to be spun from raw moonlight. The silver threads traced glowing paths along her spine and shoulders, a royal mantle of impossible power. Her eyes were not the soft brown of Arya the healer. They were twin pools of molten gold, blazing with an ancient, terrifying intelligence. The entire battle stopped. Rogues froze mid-snarl. Pack warriors lowered their blades. Daemon stared, his face a mask of pale, abject terror. Elder Theron's jaw hung open in slack-jawed disbelief. They were all staring at a creature of impossible power, a being that radiated an aura of pure, untamed majesty. The wolf, lifted my head. The pain was gone. The fear was gone. The broken-hearted girl was gone. All that remained was this incredible, surging power. I opened my mouth and a howl tore through the stunned silence of the great hall. It was not a sound of pain or of grief. It was a coronation, a declaration, a challenge to any who dared to stand against me. The sound of a queen reclaiming her throne. Chapter 21. A Storm of Two. The echo of my howl faded, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped breathing. I took a step forward, my paws making no sound on the stone floor. My movements were no longer my own. They were fluid, ancient, filled with a lethal grace I had never known. The world was a tapestry of scents and sounds, every enemy's heartbeat a frantic drum in my ears. Then, a presence at my side. I turned my head, my molten gold eyes meeting the stormy gray of the king. He was staring at me, his face a raw, open canvas of awe, of regret, and of a fierce, soul-deep love that shattered the last of my defenses. The wall he had built around his heart, the one made of scars and suspicion, had been utterly obliterated. He had seen me die for him, and then he had seen me reborn. Without a moment's hesitation, he shifted. The change was a whirlwind of shadow and power, his own massive black wolf emerging to stand beside me. He was huge, a fearsome alpha king. But I was larger. He met my gaze, and there was no challenge for dominance. There was only acceptance, partnership. He dipped his head a fraction of an inch, a king bowing to his queen. And in that moment, we were no longer two separate beings. We were one, a storm of two. We moved. It was not a battle. It was a reckoning. We flowed through the remaining enemies like a river of shadow and silver. I was speed and impossible grace, a flashing vision of silver fur and golden eyes. He was raw, unstoppable power, a battering ram of black fury. We didn't need to speak, didn't need to plan. We moved as if we shared a single mind, a single soul. I would hamstring a rogue, and he would be there a second later to deliver the finishing blow. He would charge into a group of traitors, scattering them, and I would be there to pick off the stragglers with lethal precision. The rogues, who had been moments from victory, were now consumed by a primal terror. This was not a fight they could win. They were facing forces of nature, gods of the hunt in wolf form. They broke. They dropped their weapons and scrambled for the doors, their only thought to escape the silver demon and the black shadow that hunted them. We did not let them. The hall was cleansed with a brutal, righteous efficiency. The chaos subsided as quickly as it had begun, leaving a wake of defeated enemies and stunned silence. Only a few figures remained standing amidst the carnage. Elder Theron, his wise mask finally gone, replaced by the snarling, cornered face of a traitor. And Daemon. He was pressed against a far wall, his sword hanging limply in his hand, his face pale with a terror so profound it was almost pathetic. He was staring at me, at the impossible creature I had become, his mind unable to comprehend the weak, gentle healer he had thrown away. The battle was over. Kale and I, still in our massive wolf forms, stood side by side in the center of the hall. The air hummed with our shared power. We turned as one, our eyes, one pair gold, one pair gray, fixing on the two traitors. The judgment was about to begin. Chapter 22. The Judgment of the Ash. We stood before them, a storm of silver and shadow given form. The scent of fear coming from Damon was a thick, cloying thing. He was paralyzed by it. But Elder Theron, his face twisted in a snarl of pure, undiluted hatred, was not afraid. He was a cornered viper, ready to strike one last time. He shifted back into his human form, his robes torn, his eyes blazing with a fanatic's fire. "You see?" he spat, his voice a ragged hiss, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You see what she is? An aberration, a monster cloaked in a wolf's skin. I did what I had to do to protect our bloodlines from corruption." Kyle shifted back, his human form seeming to radiate an even greater aura of power. His rage was no longer a hot, roaring flame, it was a cold, silent abyss. "Corruption?" he echoed, his voice dangerously soft. "You speak to me of corruption?" "Yes!" Theron shrieked, emboldened by his own madness. "Your first mate was a weak-willed outsider who filled your head with foolish ideas of love over strength. She would have ruined you, so I helped remove her. Just as I helped this ambitious fool remove his own weak link." He sneered at Damon, who flinched as if struck. "I did it for the good of all wolves, to keep our lines pure." So that was it. The truth, ugly and poisoned, was finally out. It was never about loyalty or tradition. It was about bigotry. About a twisted ideal of purity that had festered in the heart of this pack for decades. Kyle moved. It was a blur of motion. Theron tried to raise his poisoned dagger, but Kale was on him, his hand clamping around the elder's throat, lifting him from the floor. Theron's feet kicked uselessly in the air. There was a single, sharp crack, and it was over. The elder's body fell to the floor like a discarded puppet. His reign of shadows ended. The hall was utterly silent, but for the sound of my own ragged breathing as I shifted back to my own form. My clothes were gone, but I felt no shame. I stood there, streaks of silver glowing in my hair, my skin humming with power. Kale turned from the body of the traitor, his eyes finding mine. The cold fury in his gaze melted away, replaced by a raw, profound emotion that made my knees weak. It was awe. It was regret. It was a love so fierce and so absolute it felt like the dawn after a long, dark night. He crossed the space between us in 3 long strides. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and gently touched a silver streak in my hair, his fingers trembling slightly. "I was a fool," he whispered, his voice thick with a pain that was centuries old. "I let a ghost poison my soul. I let her betrayal blind me to the truth that was standing right in front of me." His storm-gray eyes, now clear and bright, held mine. "Fate didn't betray me all those years ago. It was just delayed. It was leading me here, to you." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "You are not a curse, Arya. You are the cure." The words healed a part of me I thought would be broken forever. In the ruins of the Great Hall, surrounded by the wreckage of our pasts, we finally found our beginning. He turned to the last traitor. Damon was on his knees now, weeping. Kyle stripped him of his title with a single, contemptuous word. Beta, no longer. He was cast out. But his final fate, Kale looked at me. That was for me to decide. Chapter 23. The Beggar on a Ruined Throne. All eyes in the hall turned to me. The power of life and death, of judgment and mercy, was now mine. Damon, the proud beta who had stood in judgment of me, was now a whimpering, broken thing at my feet. He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears and dirt, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading hope. "Arya," he choked out, his voice a pathetic caricature of the one that had condemned me. "Arya, please." I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. I felt Kyle's solid, reassuring presence at my back, a silent promise that he would support whatever choice I made. "Don't you see?" Damon crawled forward a few inches, his hands outstretched as if in prayer. "I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I was so caught up in politics and power that I couldn't see the truth, the strength that was right in front of me. His eyes fixated on the silver streaks in my hair, a greedy, covetous light entering his gaze. But I see it now. I see you. This is what fate intended. The bond knew. It knew you were this powerful all along. He was trying to rewrite history. He was trying to take my newfound power and claim it as a destiny he had always been a part of. The sheer naked audacity of it was almost impressive. It was a test, Arya, he pleaded, his voice gaining a frantic, hopeful energy. A terrible test for our bond, and we can pass it. We can start over. I'll serve you. I'll be anything you want me to be. Just give me another chance. Give us another chance. The pack watched, holding its breath. Would I show mercy? Would the gentle healer forgive the wolf who had shattered her? My reputation was one of kindness, of mending what was broken. Perhaps he thought he could use that against me, one last time. I looked down at this groveling man, this beggar sitting on the ruined throne of his own ambition. I searched within myself for any lingering trace of the love I once had for him. I searched for the echo of our bond, for the sting of his betrayal, for the hot rage that had sustained me. And I found nothing, not a single thing. It was all gone, burned away by the silver fire of my awakening. The space he had occupied in my heart was no longer a wound. It was just an empty space, and it felt wonderfully, beautifully peaceful. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't the love of my life. He was just a man, a weak, short-sighted man who only recognized value when it was glowing in the moonlight and backed by the power of a king. I let him finish his desperate, rambling plea. I let him hang on the thread of false hope he was spinning. Then, I took a deliberate step toward him. His eyes lit up. He thought he had won. "You say you see my strength now, Damon?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Chapter 24, Queen of Silver and Shadow. "Yes," Damon breathed, a desperate, relieved sob escaping him. He nodded eagerly, like a dog waiting for a scrap. "More than you can imagine. I see everything now. Your power, your beauty. You are a queen." "I am," I agreed, my voice still quiet. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. He thought this was his salvation. He was so wrong. "But the thing about seeing clearly," I continued, my voice hardening, the softness falling away to reveal the diamond-hard fury beneath, "is that I see you too?" His hopeful expression faltered. I leaned down, my face close to his, and I gave him back the words he had given me. I gave him back the stones he had used to break me. "I see your weakness. I see your ambition which you confuse for strength. I find you unfit." His face went slack with shock. "I find you unworthy." His jaw dropped. "And you?" I finished, my voice ringing with the finality of a prophecy. "Will never touch me again." I straightened up and turned my back on him as he collapsed in on himself, a hollowed-out ruin of a wolf. The ultimate justice had been served. Kale stepped up behind me, his hands settling on my waist, his presence a warm, solid shield. "It is done," he murmured, his voice for my ears alone. Then he turned to me, his stormy eyes full of a reverence that made my heart sing. "But one thing remains." In front of the watchful eyes of my pack and his commanders, he lowered his head to my neck. I arched my head back, not in submission, but in offering, in acceptance. There was no hesitation this time, no ghosts of the past, only the promise of a future. His fangs, sharp and blessedly real, sank into my skin. It was not a pain, but a completion, a surge of pure, unadulterated power, of silver and shadow, of moonlight and storms, arced between us. It was a current of pure, soul-deep recognition. I was his, and he was mine, not by fate's decree, but by choice, by battle and by blood. He was my king, and I was his queen. A day later, I stood on the high balcony of the king's fortress in the north. My home was behind me, but I was not homeless. My home was the wolf standing beside me, his arm wrapped securely around my waist. The silver streaks in my hair seemed to drink in the cold moonlight of his lands, glowing with a soft, confident light. Below us, the northern packs had gathered, their thousands of upturned faces filled with awe as they looked upon their king and his new, silver-streaked mate. They knelt as one. Far in the distance, a lone, ragged wolf was cast out from the gates of the capital, banished, broken. Damon took one last look back at the fortress, at the two powerful figures on the balcony who shone like twin constellations in the night sky. I didn't even glance his way. My gaze was on the horizon, on the future. My past was a pile of ash, and from it, I had risen. I had found my strength, my power, and my true mate. I was home.